eventually, they went on strike in 2003 to restore the old system of the single salary schedule, and didn't. So there's no data on whether it actually worked in some sense or not, but it was abolished. And lastly, 2 studies on Chile and on Mexico. Emiliana Davis. And her point in her conclusion of the 2 studies was it depends critically on how it is designed, the performance-based scheme, and how it is linked to teacher performance. So in Chile, top-performing schools got a financial bonus for students that did well on tests. Initially, the bonus is distributed among teachers in winning schools. The bonus at first had no effect on student performance, and after some years, it found that average test scores increased slightly of those in the group that was getting performance bonuses. In Mexico, there was a pay for performance that had multiple dimensions to it, one of which was paid for student performance. And the awards are substantial. You can get between 25% and 200% increase in your salary for performance. They found very small gains. The incentivized group, student achievement wrote roughly by 0.15 to 0.20 points. So it was less than 10% of the standard deviation. Now, just your impression from hearing this is that while there are clearly cases where there was no real gain, there was cases where there was slight gain, there were also cases where there was more than slight gain. And I think somebody looking just looking briefly at these studies might conclude that there's some evidence here for positive impact. Despite that, I stand by my original conclusion that teacher-parent pay is a bad idea. And I'll try and explain why, and also try and put these studies in some context, especially the methodological set of issues that are involved in looking at these kinds of studies. So, we'll return to this literature later. And let me introduce the argument of my paper by saying a little bit about my point of view. I find that few issues concerning education in society are technical. Almost all issues that I look at have a strong political / ideological / theoretical component to them. That they're not technical issues. That the issue here is not going to be decided, and should not be decided, on the basis of this research evidence. In terms of theoretical, ideological, political perspectives, I find it useful to distinguish between three. The neoliberal, sometimes we call it conservative in this country, since around the globe everybody uses neoliberal, except in this country. where it's more of a the label conservative is applied. But it's the view that emphasizes the market and the efficiency of a market system. So that's the neo-liberal. The liberal view, which emphasizes the need for government intervention, and the progressive view, which raises fundamental questions about both the liberal and neoliberal view, and looks at issues of global structures that underlie the operation of state and market, government and market. Look at issues of structures of capitalism, of patriarchy, of racism, as conditioning the outcomes of both the market and the state. I call that the progressive view. Sometimes I've used the term political economy to refer to that view. These three views are especially descriptive of the field of economics, but they apply more broadly to broad political and ideological perspectives. Globally, a liberal perspective dominated in the 1960s and 1970s. You can trace it in this country back to the 1930s, the work of John Maynard Keynes and the actions of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the New Deal, and the belief that state or government intervention in society and the economy is something necessary. But since the 1980s, what's dominated is the neoliberal perspective. Throughout, the progressives have not dominated. The progressives have been critics of liberals and neoliberals, although in a few countries they have a stronger role. I work a lot in Brazil. Brazil is run by a president from the Workers' Party. Like a number of Latin American countries, it is definitely left of center. And a progressive perspective in many ways is, if not dominant, has a much wider reception than it does in this country. And that's not just true in Brazil, that's true in places, or in other Latin American countries. It's true in Canada, it's true in the United Kingdom, it's true in Australia. But these perspectives, this characterization is not, this three-partite characterization is simplistic. These perspectives overlap, they're nuanced, they vary over time and space. Nonetheless, around the globe, these perspectives underlie many debates about education in society, about education and social policy. My own view accords with what I call the progressive paradigm. Much of my research over my professional lifetime has been about explaining the failures of neoliberal and liberal ideology and the failures of neoliberal and liberal policy. How their own internal logic and their own evidence actually support a progressive perspective. In doing so, I try to be fair and not create straw persons to attack. But that's what I did in this paper that you read. It's about neoliberal domination for the last quarter of a century or more of education and social policy. To understand merit pay for teachers, it is most useful to see it as part of a package of policies that arise from our current dominant neoliberal paradigm. Most broadly, these policies are concerned with the privatization of education, and that article that some of you read, and my talk, will look at merit pay as one dimension of this reform package. By privatization, I mean any diminishment of public sector responsibility and control.